poor boy quietly placed his last few coins on the counter, hoping to buy a small gift for his mother. But instead of a smile, all he received was cold indifference and rejection. An apathetic store clerk, an uncaring society. No one paid attention to his tear-filled eyes. No one stood up against the injustice before them. And then, Big Shaq walked in. In a single moment, cruelty gave way to compassion. Despair transformed into hope. A small act, a seemingly simple decision, but one powerful enough to change a destiny. Have you ever witnessed a moment where kindness triumphed over injustice? Share your story, and don't forget to subscribe to help spread meaningful moments. Winter of 2013. The cold crept through the narrow streets of Los Angeles, wrapping around the small houses in a thin veil of evening mist. Christmas was near, but for 12-year-old Lucas Miller, the real gift wasn't something he hoped to receive. It was something he longed to give to his mother. For an entire year, Lucas had been secretly saving every penny he could find, collecting spare change from his allowance, earning small bills by helping neighbors with chores, all for one single purpose: to buy a special gift for his mother, Sarah Miller. Sarah was a single mother, a woman whose gentle smile often masked the exhaustion etched into her features. She worked 2 jobs every day, waiting tables at a small diner in the morning, cleaning office buildings late into the night. Everything she did was for Lucas, because he was her entire world. Despite their hardships, Sarah never let Lucas feel deprived. Their cramped 1-bedroom apartment, with its peeling walls and worn-out furniture, still echoed with laughter every night. Bedtime stories, warm hugs, and whispered dreams filled the small space, making it feel like home. But no matter how strong she was, Lucas saw the fatigue hidden behind her smiles. He knew she had no time to rest, no moments to enjoy something just for herself. Then, one day, Lucas saw something he would never forget. That afternoon, after school, he and his mother passed by a small toy shop on the corner of their street. Christmas lights flickered brightly in the store window, illuminating the shelves filled with colorful gifts. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't an extravagant present. It was a single snow globe sitting on display. She paused for a few seconds, her eyes filled with admiration and longing, but also something else: resignation. Lucas curiously turned to look. Inside the snow globe was a tiny village, its rooftops blanketed in white, miniature pine trees standing tall, and delicate snowflakes swirling around when gently shaken. A small light inside cast a golden glow through the glass, reflecting on his mother's face. "Do you like it, Mom?" Lucas asked softly. Sarah glanced at him and smiled, but there was sadness in her voice. "Maybe. One day." Then she turned away, continuing down the sidewalk beneath the streetlights, leaving Lucas standing in front of the store window, his heart heavy. He knew what that meant. One day meant she would never buy it, because she couldn't. But Lucas could. At that moment, the 12-year-old boy made a decision. One day would be today, and he would do whatever it took to make it happen. Lucas tightened his small hands around the plastic box holding his collection of loose change, his heart filled with excitement and anticipation. He had counted the money more times than he could remember. $17.36, down to the very last penny, each coin and crumpled bill painstakingly gathered and saved over the past few months. He closed his eyes and imagined the moment his mother would open the gift, see the sparkling snow globe and smile. The kind of radiant smile he hadn't seen in so long. The thought made his heart race with joy. That morning, Lucas carefully tucked the money into the pocket of his coat and slipped out of the house quietly, making sure his mother wouldn't notice. Outside, the winter air wrapped around him like an icy embrace, the wind howling through the narrow alleys, making him shiver. But he didn't care. He had walked this path countless times before, but today, every step felt charged with purpose, with the unwavering belief that if he could just reach the store, if he could just buy that snow globe, everything would be perfect. The toy store sat on the corner of the street, small yet dazzling with twinkling Christmas lights hanging from its window displays. Lucas nearly ran inside, the warmth of the store instantly thawing his frozen fingers. Toys of every shape and color lined the shelves, but his eyes focused on only one thing: the snow globe in the glass case. It was still there, just as beautiful as he remembered, the tiny snowflakes inside shimmering under the store's lights like a magical world waiting just for him. His heart pounded as he took a deep breath, walked straight to the counter, and spoke with a voice barely able to contain his excitement. "I'd like to buy that snow globe, please." The man behind the counter, a middle-aged clerk with rough stubble and a face devoid of warmth, looked up at him. His gaze followed Lucas's pointing finger to the shelf where the snow globe gleamed. With an indifferent shrug, the man lifted it, set it down on the counter carelessly, as if it meant nothing. "All right, kid, $22. Lucas blinked, suddenly feeling like he had misheard. He stared at the clerk, then at the price tag. He had seen it before. It had clearly read $17.99. But now, the number staring back at him was different. $22. Number. This couldn't be happening. It felt as though an invisible hand had clenched around his heart. Desperately, he reached into his pocket, pulling out the small plastic box. He carefully emptied its contents onto the counter. The coins clinked together, a soft metallic sound that, to him, felt like the hollow echo of his breaking hope. Lucas counted the money meticulously, his hands beginning to tremble. Finally, he looked up, his eyes brimming with hope. "I have $17.36. His voice trailed off, as if he himself realized the futility of his words. The clerk didn't even pretend to be sympathetic. He barely glanced at the money before raising an unimpressed eyebrow. "You're short, kid." Lucas swallowed hard, his mind spinning in helpless confusion. He rummaged through his pockets, searching for any remaining coins he might have missed. But there was nothing. He had brought everything he had. He stared at the price tag again, his voice coming out in a whisper, as though he were trying to hold on to something slipping through his fingers. "But last week, it wasn't this much." The clerk shrugged, his tone dry and indifferent, as if none of this was worth his concern. "Price went up. You got the money or not? If not, step aside so I can ring up the next customer." It felt as if Lucas's entire world had collapsed. He stood there, frozen, staring at the snow globe as though it were drifting further and further away from him. For a fleeting second, he wanted to beg, to explain that this was for his mother, that he had spent an entire year saving every single penny for this moment. But his throat tightened, because deep down, he knew. None of that would matter to the man in front of him. Around him, the store was alive with laughter, bright wrapping paper, and the cheerful buzz of holiday shopping. No one noticed the small boy standing still in the middle of the store, his hands clenched around a handful of coins that would never be enough. Slowly, he set the snow globe back onto the counter, feeling as if he were letting go of a dream. Not wanting anyone to see his tears, he lowered his head and turned away, walking toward the door. Each step felt heavier, colder. The fragile hope that had lit up his heart only moments ago had been extinguished, like a candle snuffed out by the biting winter wind. But just as he reached the door, a deep, steady voice called from behind him, breaking through the weight of his sorrow like a ray of light piercing the darkness. "Hey, kid, let me help you with that." Lucas clenched his fists tightly, trying to hold back the emotions surging in his chest. He didn't want to cry, didn't want to show his disappointment and helplessness in front of the crowd, but the stinging sensation at the corners of his eyes grew stronger by the second. He took a deep breath, turned his back to the cash register and walked away slowly, as if he still couldn't fully accept that his small dream had just crumbled to dust over a few missing coins. But just as he turned to leave, a deep, powerful voice rang out behind him, cutting through the heavy thoughts weighing down his mind. "Hey, kid, let me help you with that." Lucas froze instantly, his small feet seemingly glued to the wooden floor. Slowly, he turned his head, and in that moment, the whole world seemed to stop. Standing before him was a towering man, so massive that he nearly overshadowed everything around him. His thick coat couldn't hide his broad shoulders, and his strong legs looked like they could cross the entire room in just a few strides. But what stunned Lucas wasn't the sheer size of the man. It was the warm, genuine smile on his face. It was a smile filled with kindness, sincerity, and a quiet sense of protection, as if he truly cared about the boy, not just as a random stranger witnessing a sad moment. It took a few seconds for Lucas to realize that the man standing before him was none other than Shaquille O'Neal. Not just Lucas, but the entire store seemed to freeze in a moment of sheer disbelief. The cashier, who had just coldly refused the boy, suddenly looked flustered, his eyes wide as if struggling to believe what was happening. A few nearby customers gasped, hushed whispers spreading like wildfire through the room. Shaq, however, was unfazed by the attention. He was used to it. But at this moment his focus was solely on Lucas. He crouched down slightly, lowering himself to meet the boy's gaze, his eyes filled with warmth. "Who are you buying this for?" Lucas blinked, swallowing the lump in his throat. He didn't know what to say, torn between shyness and the overwhelming feeling of being the center of attention. But when he looked into Shaq's sincere eyes, he realized that the man truly wanted to hear his answer. "For my mom." His voice was so small, it was almost a whisper. "She really likes it." Shaq nodded, a look of deep understanding crossing his face, as if those few words had told him everything he needed to know about the boy's love for his mother. Without another word, he reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $50 bill, and placed it on the counter with a quiet authority. "Get this for the kid, and give him the change." This time, the store was no longer silent. A wave of excitement, admiration, and awe rippled through the onlookers like a sudden storm. Some customers murmured among themselves. Others pulled out their phones to capture the moment, their eyes lighting up in astonishment as they realized they were witnessing an act of generosity in real life, right in front of their eyes from one of the most famous figures in America. The cashier stood frozen, his face caught between embarrassment and disbelief. He flipped the bill in his hands as if checking to make sure it was real. Just minutes ago, he had turned away a child without a second thought. Now, he stood in front of Shaquille O'Neal, the legendary basketball player who had stepped in to stand up for that very same boy. Lucas couldn't believe it. He stared at the money, then up at Shaq, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions so powerful he couldn't put them into words. All he knew was the warmth spreading in his chest, something he hadn't felt in a long time. But Shaq wasn't done. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering something, then suddenly flashed a playful grin. "But hey, kid, you think just one snow globe is enough?" Lucas blinked in confusion, not sure what he meant. Shaq straightened up, stretching as if he had just made a big decision, then patted the boy's shoulder lightly. "Come on, kid, let's find something really special for your mom." The store erupted into another wave of murmurs and gasps. Some people couldn't hold back their smiles, while others clapped softly as if they had just witnessed something magical. They weren't just watching an act of kindness. They were witnessing the beginning of something even greater. Lucas was still stunned, but this time he didn't feel lost or unsure. He felt something different, something warm, something safe. For the first time in a long while, someone believed in him. Someone truly cared. His wide eyes still held disbelief, but now a bright smile was beginning to form on his lips. He nodded, his heart pounding in excitement. Shaq placed a steady, reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "Come on, kid. Today, we're going to make your mom's Christmas really special." And so they walked forward together, two people from completely different worlds whose lives had just crossed in the most unexpected yet profoundly beautiful way. A poor 12-year-old boy and a man who was once a basketball legend, now embarking on a journey neither of them had seen coming. Lucas could hardly believe his ears. He had thought he had lost the chance to get a gift for his mother. Yet now, not only did he have the snow globe, but he also found himself in a situation beyond anything he had ever dared to dream. Shaquille O'Neal wasn't just helping him buy the gift. He wanted to find something more for his mother. Shaq looked at him with a bright, generous smile that carried both warmth and genuine care. His deep, resonant voice rang out like a firm declaration that today was no ordinary day. "How about we pick out another gift for your mom?" Lucas blinked, as if trying to confirm he had heard correctly. Kids like him rarely received more than the bare minimum, so the idea that someone truly cared about making his mother happy, a complete stranger no less, was almost too much to grasp. But when he looked into Shaq's eyes, he realized the man genuinely meant it. Without waiting for Lucas to respond, Shaq placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and began guiding him through the aisles of the toy store. His steps were slow yet steady, as if there was nothing in the world worth rushing for. He asked about Lucas's mother, not with casual curiosity, but with a real desire to understand the woman she was. He asked about what she liked, the work she did, what made her happy, and even her favorite Christmas meal. At first, Lucas was hesitant, but as he sensed Shaq's sincerity, he started sharing more. He talked about the nights his mother came home late, still smiling despite being exhausted. He told him about how she hugged him whenever he was sad, how she tried to create a warm Christmas atmosphere in their tiny apartment, even when there wasn't enough money for a real tree or expensive gifts. He recounted evenings spent watching old Christmas movies together on their outdated TV, how she always made him a cup of hot cocoa, even when she didn't have time to make one for herself. Shaq listened intently, his focus unwavering. Every story Lucas told painted a picture of a strong, loving woman who had given so much but had never dared to wish for much herself. After strolling through the store for a while, Shaq stopped in front of a display of thick, soft wool scarves. He picked one up, feeling its warmth in his hands, and nodded slightly as if he had found exactly what he was looking for. "This is it," he said, turning the scarf over in his hands. "This one is perfect for your mom." Lucas reached out and gently touched the soft fabric. It felt like it carried all the warmth he wished he could give his mother. He nodded without hesitation. They made their way to the checkout counter, but as they approached, Lucas realized that the store was no longer just a store. A small crowd had gathered near the register. Shoppers who had originally been strangers, simply going about their day, were now watching closely. Some had pulled out their phones to record. Others whispered to each other, their faces a mix of amazement and admiration. Then, a voice rose above the usual sounds of beeping cash registers and Christmas music playing from the speakers. "Shaq, you're a legend." An older man nearby called out, and almost instantly, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some people clapped, others grinned, pointing at Shaq with excited expressions. Shaq, calm as ever, only smiled, like he was used to moments like this. But when Lucas looked up at him, he noticed something different in his expression. It wasn't discomfort, but it wasn't excitement either. Then, through the crowd, a woman in a sharp business suit stepped forward. She stood out completely from the others, polished, professional, her cold, analytical eyes suggesting she was no stranger to handling unexpected situations. She approached Shaq and murmured something low enough that Lucas couldn't hear. But he saw the change on Shaq's face. First, surprise, as if he hadn't expected what he just heard. Then his expression shifted to something deeper, thoughtful, and finally, a strong resolve, as if a door had just opened in his mind. Lucas didn't know what had just happened, but he could sense something important was about to unfold. Shaq turned to him, his eyes still warm, but now carrying something else, something deeper. It was the look of a man who had just formed a grand plan. Slowly, he crouched down to Lucas's level, placing both hands on the boy's shoulders. His voice, no longer just generous and kind, now held a weight of sincerity and purpose. "Lucas," he said, steady and sure, "what if we don't just make this Christmas special, but change your mom's life?" Lucas froze, unsure of the full meaning behind Shaq's words, but deep inside, something told him. Whatever was about to happen would change everything. Lucas stood still, feeling as if time inside the toy store had slowed down, stretching so much that he could hear his own heartbeat. The murmurs around him, the twinkling lights reflecting off the Christmas gift boxes, the curious eyes watching him and Shaquille O'Neal, all of it blended into a distant, faded background noise in his mind. Shaq was still bent down to his eye level. His gaze no longer carried just friendliness or kindness. There was something deeper, a strong determination hidden behind his warm smile. "Hey, kid, we can make this even better." A slight shiver ran down Lucas's spine. He stared at Shaq, unsure of what the man was thinking. But one thing was certain. Shaquille O'Neal was not the kind of person who said things lightly. He swallowed, his voice small, but unable to mask his curiosity and confusion. "What do you mean?" Shaq tilted his head slightly, his eyes still warm, but his lips curled into a half-smile, as if he was holding on to a plan only he knew. "Come with me. But first, tell me, what's your mom's biggest dream?" Lucas opened his mouth to answer right away, but then he froze. This wasn't a question he could answer immediately, because he had never really thought about it. His mom had never talked about her dreams. He was used to seeing her work tirelessly, waiting tables in the morning, cleaning offices at night, always busy, always exhausted. But no matter how tired she was, she always put Lucas first, always smiled when she asked him about school, always sat beside him on cold winter nights to watch old Christmas movies. Her entire life revolved around him, and he had never once stopped to think about what she truly wanted for herself. Lucas clenched his small fists, trying to recall bits and pieces from his memories. Moments when his mother might have mentioned something about her past, things he had never paid enough attention to. And then, like a flicker of light in his mind, he remembered one night, years ago, when he was very young. That night, his mother sat by the small window of their apartment, holding a cup of tea that had long gone cold, her eyes distant as she gazed outside. Lucas had only been a little boy, but he could still remember her voice then, a voice filled with both regret and a faint glimmer of a hope that had long faded with time. "I once wanted to be a teacher," she had said, her eyes blinking as if recalling a life that could have been. "I love children. I love teaching them, helping them discover the world. But life doesn't always go the way we want it to, does it?" Lucas remembered the way she had smiled, a sad smile, yet without resentment, as if she had long accepted giving up on that dream, as if she had grown used to living for others instead of herself. Shaq waited patiently, but as he looked into the boy's eyes, he seemed to already sense the answer. Lucas took a slow, deep breath before whispering, as if each word carried the weight of things he had never voiced before. "My mom, she wanted to be a teacher." Shaq wasn't surprised. He simply nodded, his gaze sharpening, as if he was considering something very important. "But she never got to be one, did she?" Lucas shook his head, his throat tightening. "Because of me." Shaq narrowed his eyes, studying him for a long moment. "Do you really believe that's your fault?" Lucas pressed his lips together, feeling a heavy sadness in his chest. He never wanted his mother to sacrifice for him, but he knew that she had. Shaq gave a slight shrug, as if he was facing a challenge he knew he could change. "Well then," he said, his voice deep and resolute, every word carrying the weight of a promise, "let's make her dream come true." Lucas looked up at Shaq, completely stunned. He wasn't sure if he had heard correctly. Make her dream come true. What did he mean? But when he looked into Shaq's eyes, he understood. Shaquille O'Neal never said something he didn't truly intend to do. Lucas could feel something big happening, something he had never imagined possible in his life. And in that very moment, he believed that this Christmas would change everything. Lucas stood there, bathed in the warm glow of the store lights, feeling as if everything around him had suddenly shrunk and blurred into insignificance. The words he had just spoken felt like a secret he had never dared to say out loud, something he had always kept locked deep within. But when Shaq asked, he couldn't help but answer. He looked up at him, his voice dropping lower, as if each word carried a weight heavier than he could bear. "My mom always wanted to be a teacher, but she had to drop out because of me." The moment those words left his mouth, a pang of guilt crept into Lucas's mind. Not because he felt he was to blame, but because, for the first time, he was truly confronting his mother's sacrifice, not as just an inevitable part of life, but as something that should have never had to happen. Shaq frowned slightly, as if Lucas's words had touched something deep within him. A contemplative silence flickered in the legendary basketball player's eyes before he slowly straightened up. The kindness in him was still there, but now it was accompanied by something stronger: determination. Without a moment's hesitation, he pulled his phone from the pocket of his jacket, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen. He made a call right then and there, his voice low, steady, and filled with authority. "Hey, I need something. Right now." Lucas stared, his heart pounding, unsure of what was happening. He glanced around the store. People were still whispering, some were recording, others simply watching with admiration. But to Lucas, everything else had faded into the background because he knew something big was about to happen. Shaq was still on the phone, his voice calm yet commanding. "Look into scholarship programs for me. I need to know if there's anything out there that helps a single mom go back to school to finish her degree. And if there isn't..." He paused for a moment, his voice becoming even more resolute. "Then we'll make one." Lucas took a sharp breath, a shiver running down his spine. He spoke as if things could change with just a phone call. Lucas had never seen anyone make a decision that big, that fast, with absolutely no hesitation. Shaq continued speaking, his tone unwavering. "Yeah, I need to know the best options, which schools have the best programs for teachers, all the associated costs, including books and study materials. Send me everything as soon as possible." Lucas felt his heartbeat hammering in his chest, as if he were witnessing something miraculous unfold right in front of him, something he couldn't yet fully comprehend. He wanted to ask, to understand what was happening, but there was something in Shaq's expression that told him to just wait, trust, and believe. The call ended. Shaq slipped his phone back into his jacket pocket before looking down at Lucas. "Are you ready to change your mom's life?" Lucas didn't know how to answer. All he knew was that, in that moment, a spark of hope, stronger than anything he had ever felt before, ignited within him, because for the first time he realized that his mother's dream wasn't just a dream anymore. It was about to become reality. Lucas didn't know what to say, but he could feel it. Something shifting, something more powerful than any Christmas miracle he had ever heard of. Shaq wasn't just helping him buy a gift, he was creating a new future, a path Lucas had never imagined could exist for his mother. Shaq crouched down to look at Lucas again, his eyes unwavering, filled with certainty. Without giving the boy time to question anything, he pulled out his phone once more, this time to make another call. "Pick me up in front of the toy store, right now." Minutes later, a sleek black SUV rolled up to the curb, its engine humming softly in the cold Los Angeles night. A driver stepped out, opened the back door, and waited. Shaq didn't say anything else. He just placed a firm, reassuring hand on Lucas's shoulder and led him outside, as if all of this were the most natural thing in the world. As if taking a kid home in a luxury car on Christmas Eve was something he did every day. As Lucas slid into the car, he couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. The interior was warm, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside, and the air carried the rich scent of new leather. This wasn't like any vehicle he had ever been in before, but what truly left him speechless wasn't the car. It was the fact that Shaquille O'Neal was sitting right beside him, like they were old friends. The SUV rolled through the streets of Los Angeles, passing storefronts adorned with glowing Christmas lights. It glided through neighborhoods Lucas knew by heart, but from this vantage point, everything looked different. He still felt disoriented, but when Shaq turned to him with that warm, steady gaze, Lucas realized this wasn't a dream. "Tell me about your mom," Shaq said. His voice wasn't that of a celebrity making polite conversation. It was the voice of someone who truly wanted to know. Lucas stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past like memories flickering through his mind. He thought about his mother, the little things she did every day that he had never stopped long enough to realize were acts of pure, unconditional love. "My mom works a lot," Lucas said, his voice quiet in the stillness of the car. "In the mornings, she's a waitress at this small diner. At night, after it's completely dark, she cleans offices. She comes home really late every day, but even when she's exhausted, she always smiles when she sees me." Shaq didn't interrupt. He just listened, his gaze steady on the road ahead. Lucas kept going, the words spilling out as if they had been waiting for this moment. He told Shaq about the winter nights when his mother would come home, her hands ice cold, but still wrapping him in the warmest embrace. He talked about the mornings when he would wake up to find she had already left for work, with nothing but a hastily written note and a simple breakfast left behind. He spoke about how she never let the weight of their struggles break her spirit, how, even on Christmases when all they had was a tiny fake tree, she made it special. She would decorate it with old ornaments, bake homemade cookies because she couldn't afford store-bought ones, and smile as if there wasn't a single thing in the world worth worrying about. Lucas had never truly reflected on these things before, but now, saying them out loud, he realized just how much they mattered. Shaq tilted his head slightly, a small smile forming at the corner of his lips. "You know what, Lucas?" he said. "People like your mom, they're the real heroes." A warmth spread through Lucas's chest, something he couldn't quite put into words. No one had ever spoken about his mother like that before. No one had ever looked at her the way Shaq did, with genuine admiration. The SUV continued gliding through the city, past the twinkling lights of Christmas decorations. After a while, as they neared Lucas's apartment complex, Shaq leaned in slightly, his voice low but certain. "Tomorrow, tell your mom to stay home. We've got something special for her." Lucas turned to look at him, his eyes wide. But before he could ask anything, the car pulled to a stop in front of his old apartment building. Shaq stepped out first, opening the door for Lucas and resting a gentle hand on his shoulder, a silent reassurance. "Trust me, Lucas," he said. "Tomorrow is going to be a day your mom will never forget." Lucas had no idea what awaited them the next day, but for the first time in a long time, he felt something real, something stronger than any Christmas gift he had ever wished for. Hope. The next morning, Lucas woke up earlier than usual. He had barely slept all night, his mind replaying Shaq's last words before he left. "Trust me, Lucas. Tomorrow will be a day your mother will never forget." He didn't know exactly what that meant, but something deep inside him told him that today would be unlike any other day in his life. His mother, Sarah, was still busy in the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast like she did every morning, completely unaware that a surprise was waiting for her just outside the door. And then, at exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock at the door. Lucas nearly jumped out of his seat, his heart pounding in his chest. He rushed to open the door, and the moment it creaked open, he froze in shock. Shaquille O'Neal was standing there. But that wasn't all. He was holding a bouquet of fresh flowers and a large envelope. His warm smile from the day before remained, but today there was something more, something formal, something serious in his demeanor. Behind Shaq, a black SUV was parked by the curb, and a woman in a neatly pressed suit stood nearby. Lucas had no idea who she was, but he could tell this wasn't just an ordinary visit. Sarah stepped out of the kitchen, still holding a dish towel in her hands. The moment she saw the towering man standing at her doorstep, the world seemed to stop for a moment. "Oh my God," she gasped, her voice filled with disbelief. as if she wasn't sure if she was seeing what was right in front of her. She stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes wide with shock, her fingers gripping the towel reflexively. She wasn't a die-hard sports fan, but even she knew exactly who the man before her was. Shaquille O'Neal, a basketball legend, was standing at her door on an ordinary morning, holding flowers and a large envelope. Shaq offered a gentle smile and nodded slightly, a respectful greeting. "I heard you're an incredible mother, and I think you deserve this opportunity." Sarah furrowed her brows in confusion, her gaze shifting to the envelope in his hands. "I don't understand. What's happening?" Her voice wavered, unable to hide the mix of anxiety and astonishment. Shaq slowly extended the envelope to her, his deep voice steady but filled with an undeniable kindness. "You've spent your whole life taking care of your son, working tirelessly to make sure he has everything he needs. But I think it's time someone helped you chase your dream." Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She looked down at the envelope in her trembling hands, then at Lucas, who stood beside her, his eyes shining with an uncontainable hope. With shaky fingers, she opened it. Inside, there was a set of documents, and right at the top, she recognized it instantly, an application for a scholarship already completed with her name on it. The neatly typed words confirmed that she had been accepted into a teacher training program at a local college. But what nearly took her breath away was the accompanying letter. A letter from Shaquille O'Neal himself, personally pledging to cover all of her tuition, books, and even the costs of childcare for Lucas while she studied. Sarah's knees nearly gave out beneath her. She raised a hand to her mouth, trying to stop the flood of tears threatening to spill, but she couldn't. She stared at the papers in her hands, then looked up at Shaq, disbelief flooding her tear-filled eyes. This is real?" Shaq nodded, his gaze unwavering, filled with a quiet conviction. "Absolutely real. I believe that people like you deserve a chance to pursue their dreams, to build the life they once dreamed of. And, Lucas," he turned to the boy, giving his shoulder a firm but gentle pat, "he believes in you, and so do I." Sarah couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They spilled down her cheeks, not from sadness or despair, but from a joy so overwhelming, so unexpected, that she didn't know how to contain it. Lucas, still standing beside his mother, felt every wave of emotion that crashed over her. And then, without a second thought, he threw himself into her arms. Sarah clutched her son tightly, unable to say anything, because how could she possibly put into words what she was feeling in this moment? Shaq smiled softly, as if he had seen enough, as if he knew he had done something right. "All you have to do now," he said gently, "is say yes." Sarah looked up, tears still glistening on her lashes, but this time a trembling smile had formed on her lips. "Yes." She said it as if the weight of the world had suddenly lifted, as if, for the first time in her life, she was allowing herself to dream. And Lucas, standing beside his mother, watched as everything he had ever wished for her, everything he had ever hoped she could have, was finally becoming real, right before his eyes. Sarah couldn't stop the tears from falling. She held Lucas tightly in her arms, feeling the warmth of her son pressed against her chest, as if by holding on to this moment, she could make sure that everything happening was real. Her whole life, she had never dared to dream of something great for herself. She was used to sacrificing her dreams to ensure that Lucas had the best life possible. She was used to working tirelessly from dawn until late at night. used to the exhaustion that had become a part of her, a constant presence as natural as the air she breathed. But now, holding the scholarship application and the financial aid commitment letter in her hands, she felt like her entire world had been turned upside down. Shaq stood there, watching the mother and son with a gaze full of warmth and determination. When Sarah finally looked up at him, her eyes still red from emotion, he spoke, his voice deep and steady, carrying the weight of an undeniable truth. "Your son is special. He believes in you, and so do I." Lucas lifted his head, looking straight at his mother, his eyes shimmering with both emotion and unshakable faith. "I always knew you could do it." Sarah felt something inside her crack, a wall she had built over the years, a barrier that had constantly reminded her that she wasn't allowed to chase what she wanted, that she didn't have the right to dream. But now, Lucas was looking at her with hope, and a man she barely knew, a basketball legend, a figure of immense power and influence, was standing in front of her, telling her that he believed in her. How could she not believe in herself when everyone around her already did? She took a deep breath, wanting to say something, but her throat tightened. She had spent her entire life giving, but for the first time someone had given her a real opportunity. She shook her head slightly, her voice trembling as she spoke. Why are you doing this for us?" Shaq smiled, but it wasn't a boastful or insincere smile. It was a smile filled with sincerity, with an understanding so profound that words could never fully capture it. "Because I believe in people with great hearts." He said it as if it were the simplest truth in the world, as if kindness didn't need a grand reason to exist. Sarah felt her legs weaken beneath her. She couldn't believe that a stranger would help her like this, not out of obligation, not for recognition, but simply because he believed in her. Lucas reached for his mother's hand, his eyes glistening with emotion. "You deserve this, Mom," he said, his voice steady and certain. Sarah looked down at her son, then up at the man who had just changed her life in the span of a single morning. She took a deep breath, tears still streaming down her face, but this time they weren't tears of despair. They were tears of a new beginning, of a belief she had never allowed herself to have. She clutched the papers in her hands as if trying to etch this moment into her heart forever. Shaq gently placed a hand on her shoulder, offering one final word of encouragement. "You don't have to thank me. All you have to do now is believe in yourself." Sarah didn't know how to put her gratitude into words, but in her heart a fire had been lit, a fire she had thought had died long ago. And for the first time in years, she truly believed that she could chase her own dreams. Sarah sat silently at the small dining table in her modest apartment, the file still open in front of her, the words on the pages so clear that she couldn't ignore them. It was a ticket to a life she had abandoned long ago, a dream that had once been beyond her reach, but now it was right there in her hands, waiting for her to take it. That morning, after Shaq had left, Sarah was still in disbelief. She carefully read and reread every page of the documents, as if afraid that this was just a dream that could vanish at any moment. But every word, every line in the file confirmed an undeniable truth. Someone had believed in her, had seen potential in her, even when she herself couldn't. And now, she had a real chance to change her life. Lucas sat beside his mother, his eyes filled with both pride and anticipation. "Mom, are you going to do this?" he asked, his voice low but full of confidence. Sarah looked at her son, and in that moment, she had no more doubts. She was going to do this, not just for herself, but for Lucas, for the boy who had always believed in her, even when she didn't dare to believe in herself. And so, on an early spring day, Sarah stepped into a college classroom for the first time in nearly 2 decades. But the journey was anything but easy. Years of working nonstop, sleepless nights, and constant worries had made returning to school a greater challenge than she had imagined. The long lectures, the papers to submit, the nerve-wracking class presentations, all of it made her feel lost, left behind among the young students who were accustomed to sitting in a classroom and processing academic material. There were nights, after a long day of studying and working extra hours to cover living expenses, when she sat at her desk with tired eyes, wondering if she was fighting a losing battle. The numbers in her math exams overwhelmed her. The specialized education terms confused her. There were days when Sarah came home with a pounding headache, tempted to throw her books aside and return to the life she knew. A life she had learned to survive, even though it had never given her any chance to dream. And then, in those hardest moments, her eyes would unconsciously drift toward the small bookshelf in the corner of the living room, where Lucas had carefully placed the snow globe he had bought for her on that Christmas Eve. Under the soft golden light, the snow globe shimmered, the tiny white flakes floating inside, swirling in an endless dance. Every time she looked at it, Sarah remembered the moment she had held that scholarship file in her hands, the deep voice of Shaq, the way Lucas had grasped her hand with unwavering faith in his eyes. She couldn't give up. She couldn't disappoint the people who had believed in her. She couldn't abandon the dream she had once buried. And so, even on the nights when exhaustion threatened to break her, Sarah kept pushing forward. She spent late nights reviewing lessons, reading and rereading material she didn't understand. On rare days off, instead of resting, she attended teaching internships at local schools, observing how teachers guided their students, how they conveyed knowledge, and for the first time in her life, she could actually picture herself standing there, teaching a classroom full of eager young minds. Time passed faster than she expected. 2 years of hard work slowly came to an end, and one day, as Sarah stepped into the exam hall for her final test, she realized she had come farther than she ever thought possible. She hadn't given up, and on graduation day, as Sarah stood on stage, wearing her cap and gown with a beaming smile, she looked down and saw Lucas in the front row, clapping louder than anyone else in the room. But what moved her the most was the unexpected presence of a towering man in a sharp suit, standing at the back of the auditorium with a proud smile. Shaquille O'Neal had come. She couldn't believe it, but the moment their eyes met, she understood. He had never forgotten his promise. Shaq hadn't just changed her life with a single act of kindness. He had placed his faith in her, and that faith had transformed her into the person she was always meant to be. Holding her diploma tightly, her eyes welled with tears. She knew she hadn't just achieved a dream. She had proven that she could stand tall anywhere, do anything she believed in, and in that moment, she knew that her life and Lucas's would never be the same again. Sarah stood in front of the large mirror in her small apartment, gently adjusting the collar of her crisp white blouse before slipping on a light blue cardigan. The reflection staring back at her no longer bore the exhaustion of years spent working 2 grueling jobs, nor the eyes of a woman who once thought dreams were too far out of reach. Instead, she saw a strong, proud woman, a woman about to step into her first day as a real elementary school teacher. 2 years of hard work and studying had passed, and now she was no longer a waitress or a night shift janitor. Sarah Miller had become Ms. Miller, a real teacher, someone who could stand before a classroom, chalk in hand, ready to impart knowledge and plant the seeds of dreams in the hearts of young children, just as Shaq and Lucas had once planted hope in hers. Lucas leaned against the doorway, arms crossed over his chest, his eyes gleaming with pride as he watched his mother. He had never seen her look more beautiful, not because of her new clothes or neatly styled hair, but because she was shining in a way she had never allowed herself to before. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice laced with playful teasing, though admiration still seeped through. Sarah turned to him and chuckled softly. "Of course. I'm worried my students might be even more mischievous than you were as a kid." Lucas burst into laughter, but then stepped closer, his eyes filled with emotion. "You're going to be an amazing teacher. I know it." Sarah looked at her son, her heart swelling with gratitude. If it weren't for Lucas, if it weren't for the unwavering faith he had in her, she might never have made it to this moment. She reached up, smoothing his hair, a habit she had kept since he was a little boy. "Thank you, Lucas." "For what?" he asked. Sarah smiled, her eyes reflecting a tenderness only a mother could give. "For always believing in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." Lucas didn't say anything, but the hug he gave her spoke louder than words. That morning, as Sarah walked into school as a teacher for the first time, she felt a strange mix of excitement and nerves, much like the feeling she had when she first stepped into a classroom after years away from education. But as she stood before her students, looking at their eager, innocent faces, she realized that she belonged here. She told the children a little story about perseverance, about dreams, and about never giving up no matter how hard life got. They listened intently, unaware that the story was, in fact, her own. When the final school bell rang, Sarah gathered her things, a quiet joy settling in her heart. This was her new life, one she had never imagined she could have, yet here she was, living it. And it was all thanks to the kindness of a stranger and the unconditional love of her son. As she stepped out of the school gates that afternoon, a familiar black SUV was parked by the curb. Shaquille O'Neal, towering as ever, leaned against the car with a warm smile. Sarah could hardly believe her eyes. "Shaq?" He shrugged, his smile widening. "I told you. I'd always be watching." Sarah laughed, but tears of happiness slipped down her cheeks. She didn't need to ask why he was there. She knew. He hadn't just given her an opportunity. He truly cared about her journey. Shaq studied her for a moment before speaking, his voice deep but full of sincerity. "Congratulations, Ms. Miller. Today is the first day of the rest of your life." Sarah nodded, her heart overflowing with gratitude. She had come so far, from long nights juggling 2 jobs, from the sleepless worry over her son's future, to finally standing in front of a classroom, becoming the person she had always dreamed of being. She was no longer just a single mother trying to survive. She was an inspiration, a teacher, a woman who had proven that nothing was impossible when someone believed in you. And Lucas, standing at a distance, watched his mother with infinite pride, knowing she had accomplished what no one thought possible. That winter, Lucas and his mother decorated the Christmas tree together in their small apartment. Though their lives had become much more stable than before, the home was still modest, the same familiar space with its old walls. Yet a warmth radiated throughout the room, an invisible light, gentler but stronger than all the twinkling decorations outside the window. Sarah carefully opened the small box that Lucas had kept safe for so many years. From inside, she lifted a delicate snow globe, the very first gift her son had once desperately tried to buy for her. As she gently shook it, tiny snowflakes shimmered, swirling in the warm golden glow of the Christmas lights. Inside the globe, the little village remained just as it always had, a miniature world full of faith and hope, much like the two of them. Sarah turned to look at Lucas. He was no longer the frail little boy with wide, innocent eyes. He had grown into a strong, confident young man, his smile warm and steady. "You do it, Lucas," she said, her voice filled with pride. Lucas nodded softly, holding the snow globe carefully in both hands. With a reverence he had never felt for any other object, he gently placed it at the top of the Christmas tree. The lights around them seemed to soften, casting a peaceful glow over the room, as if their small home had become a sanctuary for their entire journey. A story of sacrifice, kindness, and miracles that didn't come from fairy tales, but from within people themselves. Sarah took a step back, gazing up at the tree before her. She no longer felt the emptiness that had haunted past Christmases, no longer carried the weight of sorrow or longing for what had been. Instead, she saw a path, a future they had built together, one filled with struggles, but also with the magic of love and belief. Lucas turned to his mother, his eyes reflecting the glow of the tiny Christmas lights. "I think we should keep this tradition forever, don't you, Mom?" Sarah looked at her son, and in that moment, she understood that their story was no longer just their own. Every year, every Christmas, every time they placed the snow globe atop the tree, it wouldn't just be a simple gesture. It would be a reminder that kindness could change a life, that a small gift could bring hope, that one act of generosity could open the door to a future, that having someone believe in you could change your entire world. She smiled, gently wrapping an arm around Lucas and pulling him into a warm embrace. Yes, Lucas. Forever. And outside the window, snow began to fall softly, like a quiet blessing from the universe for a journey of resilience, for dreams renewed, and for a Christmas that would never be forgotten. Some actions may seem small, yet they have the power to change a life. A 12-year-old boy just wanted to buy a gift for his mother, but thanks to the kindness of a stranger, his and his mother's future changed forever. The story of Sarah and Lucas is not just about one special Christmas. It's a testament to the power of faith, perseverance, and kindness. When someone believes in you, you can overcome any obstacle and chase your dreams. Have you ever witnessed an act of kindness that changed someone's life? Share your story in the comments below. If you love inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to help spread more positivity to the world.